All right. So here in the Northeast, not all of you are here in the Northeast, but it's cooler, rainier, and it is the first day of fall. So when I just like to note where I am in time, to note where my body is generally trending. And for a lot of people, they love this time of year. They love it when it gets cooler. They have more energy, feel a little less bogged down. And for others, it's, you feel that maybe your connective tissue feels a little stickier, a little more, it takes a little bit longer for you to warm up in the morning. So whatever this brings you, you notice the effects on your body. And that's what this subtle circling is about. It's like inhabiting this, coming home to the body. And so that little checklist that I mentioned is just a way to get you in here. And then circling the other way. And I always notice how it feels different to change direction for my body. As the connective tissue does spiral and it does follow the movements that we develop over time. So right-handedness, always leading with the right hand or the left foot or whatever it is, and we start to develop, potentiate that spiral. So turning in the other direction, over time, you'll start to notice it feels different. All right, so bringing myself to stillness. So just noticing what my low back feels like, and taking my hands and maybe rubbing along the sides of the SI joints and into the low back. So a good thing to do also is just take your hands and warm up the part that you're working on. We're going to do a deeper warm up here, but it's warming things up a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the central spiral, which is the middle dantian. And now I'm keeping the hips still. And I'm trying to learn how to isolate the movement of my spine from my hips. So I'm just kind of circling like a top over the top of my hips, being still and stable with the floor. Noticing one direction and then going and noticing the other direction. All right, so we're going to come back to the middle, roll the shoulders, which then is working where the clavicle comes into the manubrium. My shoulders moving up and down, so my clavicle's moving up and down, and that's circling a little bit through the shoulder joint, and of course moving my scapula along the back, getting a nice circling along the back. And circle the other way. Noticing where your mind is at, does it want to go into the events of the day ahead or the events of yesterday, or are you just sort of kind of feeling dull? Some people like wake up and it's not the best time for their brain. So just kind of noticing whatever's here without like chasing it away or making it something other than what it is. Just noticing. Okay, and then bringing the ear towards the shoulder and relaxing and rolling forward. Always easy with the neck. No pushing. You push the neck, the next day you're like, okay, I can't turn my neck. You just do a gentle roll within your easy range of motion. And then you can kind of gently start to feel to the edge of that stretch as you warm up. But not overdoing it. So if your neck's already bothering you and it hurts to go over to that direction, you could always short the movement and let your body, just slowly start to warm up through there. If it's interesting, you can go over there and just kind of visit it for a second, do a couple extra movements back and forth, and so you get a little more information. Remember, we're trying to connect the mind and the body. A lot of times we get hurt and we have no idea how it happened because, your brain was over there and your body was over there, and we're like, how did that happen? So we take this opportunity to do a mind-body exercise. We're really intently trying to come into the body and notice it and be with it. So I'm circling the opposite hand out and actually befriend it. Letting that shoulder get a nice turn in the opposite direction of daily motion. And that might be really easy for you, and it might be harder. And you're just noticing that. One side may be tighter than the other. Okay, so I'm going to come back to stepping out. Now, when we do this side to side stretch and front to back stretch, we're exacerbating the directions of that the pelvis can move, that when we're in Tai Chi, we don't do. We actually hold that still and move everything else around it, right? So everything else is moving, the appendages are moving around it. So we get to play here. So think about this as a little bit of play. So I get to slide and glide my hips left and right and sitting in my legs, creating a little bit of heat and feeling like, you have a connective tissue, fibrous connective tissue cuff around your hip joint. And you're just asking that cuff to release enough to let your hip slide and glide within the socket. So no forcing, just asking for just a little bit more movement than you might have gotten yesterday. What does it feel like in there? Where is the tightness in there? Be curious. All right, we come back to the middle and we go into anterior and posterior pelvic tilt, which we know more about now that we study Tai Chi, because we know that we're trying to get the low back a little bit more flat. Or if you're very flat in your low back, you're just trying to get your hip crease back. So I could go put my hand on my sacrum and one hip crease and feel my low back go flat, and then ask the hip crease to come back. Lengthen the low back, hip crease. So I'm going through more of the extremes of anterior, posterior pelvic tilt in order to find the middle again. Okay, and then I want to see if I can drop my pelvis a little bit more to a neutral, where it's not really tight in my low back and it's not really tight in my hip flexors. There's a little sunk feeling in the hip flexors and a relaxed feeling, of a downward feeling in my back. It's not like you're going to get rid of your curve entirely. You're designed that way, but you're lengthening that curve. Okay, and then last is the diagonals, which I find interesting because, we do move across diagonals all the time, but to do this exercise kind of opens us up to that direction in the hip joint. going across the diagonal, the opposite diagonal, but if you didn't get that. And now, after I've asked the socket to open up, just see if you can like let the center of your pelvis, like as though there's a puddle in the bottom of the bowl, and that puddle is drawing you down into the earth. So you just feel the weightedness, which is easier to feel weight without tension. So think about that. If I want to feel the sinking energy, and we are moving into the fall, lung and large intestine, the energy of sinking. You know, a fall is like the fruits are falling off the trees, things like that. There's a sinking energy. And in order for me to really feel the sinking energy, I can't have tension that's holding me up from feeling the sinking energy. So doing this exercise, releasing the ligaments and the tendons around my hip joints, it's releasing some of the held tension, especially if you're sitting more than anything in your day. You're releasing some of the tension around the hip joint so that you actually can feel the natural weight of your pelvis just sink into the earth. So that's a different way to think about, you know, what's going on here. Okay, I'm gonna open up the ball shape and just open up the elbows, push back the wrists, open up through the fingers, and release, come back. We're going to do this 3 times. You just get to practice that the fingers come in, the elbows stay slightly out so that the shoulders stay open. So you almost have to resist the want to pull your fingers in from your pec. Okay, so that's the whole key here is, so I push back through my elbows. I'm energizing the muscles between my shoulder blades and then my wrists and then my fingertips, which is now stretching the whole pericardial line as far as the meridians are concerned, the median nerve. And then just relax the wrists. And then let the elbows come into a bend, but resisting using the front of the shoulder or the pec to bring. So you just let the bend happen at the elbow. And at a certain point, you can kind of just, you know, open up the elbows outward, almost like you have somebody pushing on your elbow. Just let your elbow open up outward, and that will help you stay open in the front of the shoulder. And we'll just do this one more time. Elbows, wrists, fingers. And then release the fingers. Then letting the elbows come into a bend, just like they're kind of naturally rounding up again. And at a certain point, you're going to want to, here, you may say, well, that's good enough of a bend, and you go to the pec. And that's what we're trying not to do. Don't go to the pec. Instead, push out to the elbow a little bit more to let your fingers come in so that you leave the pec out of it. All right, now we're going to do open the back. So when I bow forward, you're not bending my knees. Now, this is a spinal exercise, just like we did in isolation for the pelvis. We're now kind of isolating the spine. All right, so I'm not bending my knees. I'm stretching my low back. My hands stay right in front of the shoulders. And then I open up the upper thoracic curve. And open the low back. And if you've got a real tight low back, you should feel that as a stretch. And then if the thoracic curve going the opposite direction is tight, then it may feel a little bit more like an effort to open up to the sky. But again, I'm not bending my knees to do this, not in my legs, really in my back. And I'm not moving my arms, right? It's not a shoulder exercise. It's a core exercise. Hands are right in front of my shoulders. So you're learning how to isolate to get to know muscles that control that movement. So that eventually when we put all the movements together, you have more language, you have more words for your paragraph because you're able to move different parts of your body and ask them to come in and help your overall movement. All right, now I do soften my hip. That just gives me a little bit, when I'm stiff in the hip, it's a little harder to turn through the low back. But if you just soften it. I don't mean really bend the knee a lot. Just let go of some of that openness. Just let it soften a little bit. And then the rest is going to be low back, middle back, and upper back. So you're letting yourself turn again. If somebody were to look at you from the side, soften the hip and turn, low back, middle back, and upper back. When I get to this turn, if someone were to look at me where I'm pointing, they would see that my hands are still in front of my shoulders. So it isn't a shoulder motion. It's really deeper core, low back, middle back, upper back. And release. It's just a softening of the hip, low back, middle back, upper back. And then we add the neck, which is part of the spine. Soften the hip, low back, middle back, upper back. Make sure your chin is aligned, your tailbone is down, and you look out over your elbow. And then release again. Soften the hip, low back, middle back, upper back. Upper back can be felt as though you're pushing somebody with your elbow. Just gives more energy there. And then chin and tailbone down and look over your elbow. Okay. And now we're going to side bend. Again, this is an isolation. My knees are not bending. If you can get yourself to figure out how much motion you can create by moving your torso, you can save yourself a lot of mileage on your legs. You use your legs when it's time to use your legs. We tend to use the legs or the knees, all the time. So this isolation is teaching you how to get more motion through your upper body. So I'm lengthening up one side of my ribs and lengthening up the other. It's also quite nice for just expressing the organs that live under the ribs. All right, and then last, we're going to drop forward and do the full round. Hold, lift, turn, drop. All right, and then circle the other way. By having worked the major moving directions of my spine, it helps the circle to feel more smooth and full, because I have more language through my spine. All right, and then we're going to come back to the lower position and rise up and step in. And so something I've been working on the last week or so is this idea that if I have the ability to move my core, that my core can move my leg. So we worked on this a little bit last week, but I'm just going to repeat that so you don't lose that. So if you take your clothes, you just grab whatever it is that you're wearing, and you sit down as though you're about to do a Tai Chi turn. And you pull your clothes to one side, and then let that turn your leg. Okay, and then come back. And you can switch hands and pull your clothes the other way, and then let that turn your leg. And then come back. Reverse. It's just easier to have the direction you're going, that hand on the top. Pull and turn. And then you can pull back and bring the toes in. Switch hands, pull and turn, and then pull back and bring the toes in. So the idea here is that the central cylinder rotates the leg. And when I don't do it that way, oh yeah, I'm doing Tai Chi, I'm going to sit and I'm going to turn my leg, and you go and turn your toes out, and you didn't do anything with your body, your tailbone's going to stick out and your hip will lock up. And it's going to be very uncomfortable for the knee that you're turning from as well. And you're going to have to work really hard to rearrange your body. So we worked on this on Thursday in both of my classes, and it really is a revelation. I'm having you grab your clothes, and that's kind of an outer way of doing this. but really you're wearing a fascial suit underneath your skin. And if you just use that, oh yeah, I can soften my hip and rotate my spine, and that rotation of my spine becomes the rotation of my leg, you're going to have a more unified turn. You'll also get to keep your crown point up and your tailbone down, and you don't have to recreate that to be able to get to the next move. So without grabbing the clothes, now we're going to move from the internal suit, the internal clothes. I'm going to sit and I'm going to feel that slight softening of the hip in the direction that I'm going to turn. And I'm going to start to spiral low back, middle back, and start turning your leg. Right? And then when you want to come back, you're going to cue the other hip to soften, because you can't, right now you'll feel that, you got an openness and a pushing in that leg as you go to this side. This one softens, this one opens. You have to let this one soften and let the other one open. So the hip where I came from, that softens, and then my heart turns and it brings my toes in. Very, very different than thinking, and I know that I've made the mistake of make sure you turn your toes. And if you do that from your foot, you're going to lock your pelvis out. So again, if I do this just from my core, crown up, tailbone down, soften the hips slightly and turn low back, middle back, foot. Okay, if I had my arms, I could then feel the upper back, because what brings the energy to the arms is that energy of the upper thorax. Okay, so here I crown up, tailbone down. I turn low back. So notice I soften the hip, I turn low back. It doesn't disturb my knees. They're still with my toes. And then middle back, I can really feel how that gets into turning my leg. And then if I had my arms, the upper back, I could feel a little bit more spiral, because I'd have to bring energy to the blocking hand. All right. And last, the eyes, which would be the neck. All right. So if we just do that, this is not in our form, the form that we do, but I'm just going to have you do a block side to side. So I'm going to sink and raise my hand, and you don't have to do anything with this arm after this. You soften the hip in the direction that your arm is out. Turn low back, knees are still with the toes. And then upper back, or middle back, you start to feel the split between the hips. This one opening, this one folding more. And then upper back, you just express the extension or the expansion through your arms and neck. Very subtly, my head is looking at what I just blocked. Okay, so we're doing the fundamentals, and now we're adding it all back to Tai Chi. Crown up, tailbone down. As I sit, my hand is going to float up. Okay, and I'm going to go low back. So you soften the hip and start to turn your low back. And then you're going to feel more spiral as you start to go into the middle back and turn your leg, and upper back between your shoulder blades, expand the arm, and then look out over your hand at what you're blocking, and that's going to get the subtle turn of your neck. So I think we did this as a balance challenge a couple of weeks ago. We're just going to step out a little wider so you can feel this more. So I'm going to sit down. Let's do our form, but with the ball, but we're just going to be wider in the stance. Okay, so that here you have to feel that if you don't change your hips, it's going to be hard for you to put weight on the foot that you want to get onto. So you soften the hip, turn the low back, middle back, turn your foot out, upper back so you can expand towards that foot and looking between your hands, and then shift, crown over, tail over foot. Get your vertical, chin in, tailbone down. That internal cue will help you to get vertical enough to get upward energy for your leg. It just increases the challenge for your balance if you step out wider. Okay, so I'm going to chin up or crown up, tailbone down. soften the hip, start to feel the low back, middle back turning the leg, upper back expressing the arms and looking out over where your outer hand. And then adding what we did a few weeks ago, peel up the heel, which moves my weight to the, or stacks my masses, the head, the thorax, the pelvis towards the foot. But there's still, to get fully over there, I have to shift. And then if I don't do anything, I'm just separate masses. What's going to bring these masses together? Chin in, tailbone down. It's like a central string pulling the pieces together. All right. So a little bit of adding the several layers of what we've done over the weeks. A little wider, challenge your balance. Soften the hip, start turning the low back. You feel it moving up your back, turn your leg, and then express through your arms in the upper back and look with your head, and then start to peel your heel, put your crown, your thorax, and your pelvis towards your foot, and then to bring it all together, chin in, tailbone down a little bit more. Okay, so what I was doing the other day was, a lot of us know how to stack our masses at this point. We know how that, you got to do crown over tail over foot, that. But if I don't energetically reconnect those things, I still will fall apart. So I'm going to just do this really wide so you can really see how bad it can be. So I soften the hip and I turn low back, and I turn out my foot and I peel my heel, and I have to go a little bit longer distance because I'm wider, right? I get my crown over to move my tail in between my head and my foot, but I'm just stacking my masses. I still have to throw my body around to get up on one foot. So once I've stacked the masses, it's almost like there's a cord from my crown to my tail. And if I just make that cord a little bit more taut, it makes the energy of up and down, the very vertical energy, which helps me to stand on one foot. So now I'm over there and I stack my masses as best I can, and I bring in my chin and my tailbone, crown up. And it looks easy, but actually I was using energy. I was using vertical energy internally to help me to get on one foot. If I relied only on the stacking of my masses, I wouldn't necessarily have vertical energy moving in both directions. All right, so that is a lot of things that we've been talking about, how to turn, peel up your foot, stack your masses, adding the vertical energy, also to turn your leg with your back, with your core. Okay. And the reason you could start turning the leg a little sooner. So I soften the hip and I feel the low back. I could start there. That's totally fine. But what I'm feeling here is that I could turn my back and not turn my legs. I could turn my back a little bit. And when I feel really a lot more energy going to that leg, I can allow the leg to turn. Okay, so it's not strictly like this, back and leg. Because when I'm blocking someone, I sometimes have to feel that I'm going there to bring my whole body there. Whereas if I do it more mechanically, back and leg, you don't see the energy of what my intention is. Okay, so here I'm opening my body I'm already creating a shape of where I'm going to go. And then I feel the leg turn with that. In other words, it's happening inside before it's happening outside. Here, when my core and my leg are doing exactly the same thing at the same time, it looks more mechanical. There's less of a sense of the energy preceding the movement. Okay, these are very subtle things. And if you only get one thing out of all the things that I just said, it's great. But getting the sense that when you grab your clothes, and if you take your whole core, and I actually did this physically to some people on Thursday. It's like there was too much of this going on. The first movement, starting to move arms and legs and not engaging the core to move them. If you go to the core, everything moves. If you never locate the core, then you're always in this kind of syncopated, not connected, not harmonious way, moving your arm, moving your leg, moving your head, moving your foot, it's all these parts. When I get my core connected, the core moves everything. Okay.